this new mission field that God has told us several times in the Bible, that we're to leave a legacy of faith for our children's children and their children. It's almost a threefold command that we would leave a legacy for those who've yet to come. And we may never even see them, but yet the seed that we plant in our own grandchildren will be continued on as they become godly men and women.
Welcome to the Christian Music Archive podcast, conversations about Christ, community, and music. I'm your host, Dave Maurer. One of the reasons I started the Christian Music Archive over 20 years ago now was that I wanted to document the legacy of the Christian artists that I appreciated. As I dug deeper into the lives and ministries of these men and women, I began to realize that a musician's legacy is much more than just the sum of the albums and songs that they produced. Many artists have a cause that they support. Some legacies are defined not by the success of their careers, but by their failures or struggles. But regardless of the individual's story, they are leaving a legacy. Today, I'm talking with Scott Wesley Brown about his legacy, and I must admit I fell into the thinking that I find a lot of the music industry does. Let's talk about your legacy in music. And if I had stuck with that, I would have missed what very well could be the biggest and most important legacy we all have, that of impacting our families. So, while this podcast is designed to look at the stories of musicians, I'd invite you to join this conversation about how Scott's legacy is still being written. The sum of the music he has released is definitely part of that legacy, but it is really so much more. Welcome, Scott. I know that many of our listeners know about you and your music, but I'm sure that there's a lot of people that are listening that probably have never heard of you. So let's talk a little bit about who you are. Now, you've been making music for quite a while, about 50 years if my calculations are correct.
That sounds so long. Golly.
It just means you have a big book.
Yeah, I do. Oh, yeah, I have. I started in 1974. And then really launched it in 76.
So you were in the kind of the tail end of the Jesus movement and getting into the start of CCM, so to speak.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I started back, and for those people who might remember, my first manager was Larry Norman.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And
fun.
That was back, and he had a thing called Solid Rock Records. And it wasn't really going anywhere, but it was myself, Randy Stonehill, Mark Hurd, and Steve Camp, and we were the guys that he was basing this whole record label on, and eventually I think he got something out on it. But by that point, I had gone off to another label, and so had Steve. So anyway, but that's when I started back with Larry back in about 1973.
Okay,
was when I was with him, and then I started doing my own recording. In about 74, I had an album come out that was an independent album. And then 75, I signed with a label called New Pax, which was led by a guy named Gary Paxton, who,
right.
For people who don't know who he is, if you've ever heard the song Monster Mash,
yep,
they play it every Halloween.
Yeah.
Gary ran that label, and I was on that label with Don Francisco and several other people were on it. I can't even remember. It's been so long.
Weren't Farrell and Farrell on that label for a while?
I think they might have been, yeah. And but that was kind of a short-lived experience, because then I got an offer from Billy Ray Hearn, who had just started Sparrow Records and had just signed Keith Green. As a matter of fact, the day that I auditioned, he brought Keith Green with him to the Jesus 76 festival.
Oh, yeah.
And in Pennsylvania, and I was on stage, and I was actually auditioning, and my backup band was a group called Glad, and Myrrh Records was there, and Myrrh liked Glad, and Glad had a special little showcase, so they went over and heard them and signed them, and while they were signing with Myrrh, I was signing with Sparrow, and so that ended that relationship. Unfortunately, they were a super band to play with, great guys, and
yeah.
anyway, but Billy Ray said, I brought this young guy with me named Keith Green. I wanted to check him out and see how he does live. And of course, he blew the roof off the place.
Yeah.
And so anyway, but that's how all that got started with Sparrow. And that really became my home for most of my recording life. I was there until, I guess it was into the 90s that I was still with Sparrow, and then switched over to Word. So anyway, interesting little tidbits for those who really care.
Yeah. Well, how did you actually get started in music? I mean, was this something that your parents were forcing you to play guitar or piano, or?
No. Actually, when I was like 3 or 4, my grandmother had an old piano, and I would just bang on it, and everybody thought it was banging. But my dad kind of thought, maybe he's got something there, something that sounded like a chord every once in a while would come out. And then I got to 6th grade, and I had taken up the guitar, and I formed a little band for a talent show in 6th grade called the Surfers. Isn't that funny? I was on the East Coast, and I started a group called the Surfers. And it was because mainly I was the only guy in elementary school who had an electric guitar. And so everybody wanted to be in my band. And so that became, when I got up on the stage in the cafeteria, and all of my 6th grade, students, particularly the girls, were screaming and hollering, and I thought, hey, this is pretty neat. I like this. And so I decided, because I sort of was tempted with the drums, but then I realized, the drummer's in the back, so nobody sees the drummer. So I think I'll be the lead singer and guitar player. And so from there on, I was in one band after another, and sang in the church choir and sang in my school choir, and anything I could do that was musical. I had tried trumpet in the junior high band, but that didn't work out real well. But anyway, so I was really totally engulfed in music. And then when I became a Christian in the summer of 1970, right before my senior year in high school, then my music took a real turn, because I wanted to use it as an opportunity to share Christ. And
right.
So that's where that began. And
so had you been writing music through grade school and high school, or?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting, because I was failing in 6th grade. I was failing English, and we came to a section in English where we were going to do poetry, and the teacher assigned every student to go home and write a poem, and just to see how they would do. And she liked my poem so much that she read it in front of the class.
Oh, wow.
And then she said, Scott, she said, will you write me a poem every night, and you bring it in, and I'll work with you on the grammar. And so she did that. And by the end of the year, my poems had turned into songs. And I really look at this 6th grade teacher, Mrs. Brewer, who we don't know where she is. I've tried to find her, and actually did an article about her in Guidepost magazine. But we tried to find her, to let her know just what an impact she had on my early stages in poetry. But anyway, those turned into songs, and then I, kept continuing to write. And when I became a Christian, they turned from, mostly love songs about, dating and, the things that you fall in love in high school, those kind of songs.
Right.
They turned into songs, proclaiming Christ. And although I still write a love song now and then, I've written them for my daughters who've fallen in love and lost boyfriends, and
right.
And I've written several love songs to my wife, and several wedding songs as well, which have been used in quite a number of weddings around the country, which is exciting. So anyway, that's how all that got started.
Well, I find it interesting that a lot of people start out writing love songs and so forth. And it's interesting to me because one of God's commands is for us to love one another. And is it a coincidence that this gift that he's given us of music is often tied to this gift he's given to us of love? And I just find that an interesting thought. So, well, you talked about high school. You found the Lord. I'd be interested in hearing that story.
Well, I was the president of my youth group at church. I didn't know the Lord, and one of my best friends became a Christian. He called himself a Jesus freak, and he freaked all of us out. So that was something we didn't know how to respond to. We were going to a church that was just more the social gospel, and good people, but just not really not really connecting with what it meant to be a Christian, a follower of Jesus. And Kirk came and started witnessing to everybody. And after a while, we wanted to get rid of him. But we were going on this youth group retreat to Virginia Beach, Virginia, at the end of the summer, right before my senior year. And at the last minute, the counselors who were going to go with us, they canceled. The couple that was going to chaperone our group. And so the church said, well, you can't go. And nobody wanted to do it.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to deal with us for a week at the beach. And so the only option was Kurt came up with this idea to get this pastor of his church that he was going to, his new discovered church, which was a very Pentecostal church.
Okay.
And this guy was a real preacher. And see, we were a Presbyterian youth group.
Yeah.
And so it was amazing that he was coming, and he said, I'd be glad to do it. And I thought he was just going to preach, our ears off, but he didn't. He just was a guy that just spent time with us and loved us and, chatted with us. He was interested in what we were going through and our thoughts, and really a wonderful guy. And so while I was there at the beach, earlier that summer, I had played at a tent revival meeting, just because I was a guitar player and I'd learned some Christian songs. And one of the nights while we were at the beach, I ran into this, discovered this Christian coffee house, and there was a band up there playing. So they were giving away free soda drinks. So we went up there to get that. And I heard this Christian band. I thought, oh, hey, I know some of those songs. And so during one of the breaks, I went up, found the manager of the coffee house, and I said, hey, I'd love to play here. You got some room to stick me in? And he goes, well, tonight we're pretty filled up with the band I have. He said, but if you want to come back tomorrow night, just meet me, 15 minutes before we open and just sing me a song or two. And,
Yeah.
And I said, okay. So I showed up with the whole youth group, and I was on the back steps and I sang a song, and he said, oh, that's great. Okay, well, why don't you go up and, can you do 45 minutes and then take a break? I said, yeah. So I went up and I just sang all these songs that I'd learned at these revival meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the very end, I gave an altar call.
Oh, wow.
And I can't remember to this day, because people have asked me, did people come forward? I can't remember. I just remember saying the same words that this preacher had preached at the revival meetings I was at. And I thought I was kind of doing the Lord a favor by doing that, because I thought, well, I'll just help these Christians out, And so during the break, the manager came up and he said, Scott, that was fantastic. He goes, how long have you been a Christian? I said, oh, I'm not.
Oh, wow.
And he said, what? You're not? He said, you just gave an altar call. And I said, well, didn't you want me to? I thought it would help you out. He started laughing. He goes, well, brother, he said, I appreciate it, but he said, you need to come to Jesus. And he challenged me to do that on the next set, to give my heart to Christ, but I chickened out. I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But when I got back to the house that we were all staying at, down the road a piece across from the beach, I remember this pastor, this Pentecostal guy, was on the rocking chair, and he was just smiling like a Cheshire cat, rocking back and forth and just looking at me. He said, man, I heard what you did.
Yeah.
I said, yeah. And he said, you need to do that. You need to come to Christ. I said, well, I know, but I'm not sure. And he says, listen, Scott, he said, a bunch of your buddies, they were obviously impacted by what you shared, and they're across on the beach right now giving their hearts to Jesus. Why don't you go over there with them and do the same thing? And I said, really? And I said, okay. So I went across the street and I walked out on the beach down by the ocean, and I didn't see anybody. And then the moon, that was it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I remember I just started crying, and I just said, Lord, I don't know how to do this right, but I really do want to know you, and I want to walk with you. I want Jesus to live in my heart. And gave my life to Christ, and it was August of 1970.
Wow.
And so I became like that preacher. I just wanted everybody to know. And that changed my music and moved me in a whole different direction than where I was headed. So that's where it all took place and how it began.
That's an incredible story. I've never heard of anybody giving themselves their own altar call, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a little weird, but
It proves that God uses all kinds of things to help get us straight up.
Absolutely, he does. He does.
Oh, so that was this in 70, right? And then
Right.
4 years later, you recorded your first album, or 3 years later, you recorded your first album.
Yes, in 1973.
So you had obviously over that 3 years decided, I mean, like you said, this is music that I need to tell people about Jesus. Were you doing more like coffee shops and stuff, or just singing in church, or how was that working?
Well, I mean, coffee shops at that time were pretty much the only outlet for Christian artists to be able to sing at. Church wasn't quite ready in the early 70s. We were able once in a while to do a folk hymn, like
Uh-huh.
Kumbaya or
Right.
Michael Row the Boat Ashore. I mean, that was where the church was at. And we wanted to bring drums in, and that was, oh, no, you are not bringing drums into the church. And but eventually the church started opening up and being more acceptive of that, and they started having these Jesus festivals, and I got to sing at a couple of those in the mid '70s, and had recorded that first album, and then got my contract with Sparrow, and then I did a wedding song called "This Is the Day" on that
Mm-hmm.
first album, and that really took off, and um, a lot of weddings people used it, and then radio picked it up, and so that's really which kind of helped. And I had a couple of other early songs like "I'm Not Religious, I Just Love the Lord," and
Right.
I Wish You Jesus," and those took hold. And all of a sudden, where I was just playing in a one or two state area, I had people finding my phone number and calling me up and said, "Hey, you want to come up to Minnesota? You want to come down to Texas?" And I'm thinking, "Wow, this people actually like me. They like
Yeah.
these songs." And my dad was elated. My dad was the one who just really contacted Sparrow and got Billy Ray Hearn at the time, who was the president and
Right.
the guy who founded it, and got him interested in my music, and was there when I signed my contract. Actually, on a napkin, I believe it was,
Wow.
at this festival, and so yeah, and then you started getting churches inviting artists to come in, and colleges, and I was on the college circuit for many years singing it, mostly always Christian colleges,
Right.
a few universities. The Christian fellowships would have me come in and other artists, and then you started having more and more concerts being held at civic centers and places like that, which was exciting. So it just kind of grew. It was amazing. I never had any of it imagined that any of it would have happened.
Well, now a lot of your songs I know were recorded by other people, and like the Imperials and Amy Grant, and I remember hearing like Placido Domingo even recorded one of your songs.
Yeah, that was amazing to have this famous opera singer. When they called me up, when Billy Ray called me up and told me, he said, "Are you sitting down?" I said, "No." He said, "You need to sit down." And I did, and he said, "Placido Domingo just recorded one of your songs." And I'm
Wow.
thinking, who in the world is Placido Domingo?
Yeah.
I have no clue. But it turned into like a triple platinum album, and
Wow.
he did it with John Denver, which John Denver was one of my early influences in music, and so I was delighted that I had a song on an album that John Denver was actually on it, and
Yeah.
so that was exciting, yeah, to have that. And then, and I never really wrote for other people. It's just somehow my songs would get out to different uh, producers and people, and then they would say, "Hey, let's let so and so."
Yeah.
The only person I actually wrote a song for was Sandy Patty,
Oh.
and they asked me to write one for her, and I can't even remember what the name of it was.
So the songwriting was kind of a side effect of your record contract with Sparrow then.
Yeah, I mean, and they own the publishing, and of course they wanted other people to record the music too, because that
Yep.
helps them builds their publishing company. So we had a number of cuts through Sparrow, and then I eventually left Sparrow on the publishing side and signed with a Nashville-based publishing company where I lived at the time. And then they actually were guys that we had all these different writers, and I mean some of them have gone on to be really, really extremely successful songwriters and write for a lot of major country artists. And then Steve Curtis Chapman started in that little room that we used to write in, and he and I wrote a song or two together, and other artists. And so that became kind of my publishing hub for maybe the second part of my career.
So but you still think of yourself more as a recording artist, not a songwriter per se, right?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, I still write a lot, but my songs now are just independent, and I put them on YouTube, and they're on iTunes and all of the Spotify and some of the other sites, but they're not as far reaching because I don't have the giant machine behind me,
right?
To really push those songs.
Well, and the whole industry's changing, and some of that machine has changed too.
Yes,
so.
Right, it has.
Well, I was first introduced to your music in the late 80s. I was a DJ at a radio station in Boise, Idaho, and was playing your music there. And the thing that I always thought Scott Wesley Brown is this missions guy who writes songs about missionaries.
Right.
And because you were actively involved in a couple of different mission organizations, isn't that correct?
Yes, and it still is today. One of my greatest passions is the whole missionary enterprise, because I really believe it's not an optional thing, that we kind of can get involved or not. That the commandment to go into all the world is for all of God's church,
right,
to be participators either through prayer or financial support, or actually going. And so I did travel. I've been to over 50 countries, and most of them half a dozen times. And the 80s and the 90s were really big years of travel for myself and my family. I brought my kids with me and my wife, and wrote a lot about outreach and witnessing for Christ all around the world. And
right,
and so that became a major thrust of my life for the 2 decades at least.
So were you going as a missionary, or were you going as supporting missionaries that by taking music to them, or what was that looking like for you?
Well, I really wasn't a missionary in the proper sense. I called myself a musicianary,
Mm-hmm.
and would go and bring instruments and do concerts and encourage the missionaries at their bases. And we would do outreach concerts. Like, if I went to Japan, I would sing for all the missionaries who were there. We'd have like a house concert or something, or in a little chapel. But then I would also do outreaches at the universities, and they would go and the same in many other countries. And we were just burning the road up, or the skies, literally just flying. I mean, all over the world. And it didn't work real well with the record companies, because you do an album, they want you to tour the United States, and I'm saying, hey, I'm going to Nigeria. They go, what? Nigeria? They don't have records over there. I know, but maybe they will someday. So, and there was a guy at Word Records. He's no longer here. He's with the Lord. But Ted Blameyer was the head of the international distribution for Word, and Ted said, you know what? Scott's out there creating markets. So, he had a real passion for the nations, and he understood it. And so he would say, you know what, he's witnessing to people, he's sharing the gospel, he's encouraging missionaries, but he's also carving out a new market for our company. And so some of the guys at Word, they say, oh yeah, well, that makes sense, and it was a kind of a pioneering effort.
Right.
But, because when I went over to most of those countries, I gave my albums away.
Right.
And, and they didn't have record players. They did have cassette players. And so we would just make all these cassettes, and the record companies actually, both Sparrow and Word, the two labels that I was predominantly on, donated a bunch of songs royalty free. And we made a whole ton of cassettes with those songs, no royalties, nobody had to pay anybody. And we took them out and we just gave them away to people, or charged them like maybe 10 cents, because that way they would value it.
Right.
And so that was one of the ways of getting some Christian music out there. And then in Asia, it was really funny, because there was a guy over there bootlegging all these Christian albums. and he was just selling thousands of albums, cassettes
Huh.
at the time, and you would get see these cassettes, and it was a totally different picture. It
Oh,
was
no.
usually a blurred picture. He'd taken it from a magazine and stuck it on. They were the horriblest things, but the sound quality was pretty decent. And I remember Sparrow Records thought, this guy is just ripping us off. What are we going to
Yeah.
do? And then one of the guys at Sparrow went over and met him and saw his apparatus and said, you know what? Instead of trying to shut this guy down, we need to legitimize him. And so they made him their legitimate distributor of Southeast Asia.
Wow.
And now he's the biggest distributor of Christian music in Southeast Asia. And it's
That's so cool.
all done legally, and it's great. And I've worked with him and been to many countries, the Philippines, Taiwan, Hong Kong, all over Malaysia and Singapore. And so, it's been exciting just to see how Christian music has grown and spread throughout the world.
And people are hungry to hear it.
They are. And a lot of them have their own, style of music, which I always encourage them to do. Don't just try to get up on a stage and sound like Sandy Patty or Stephen Curtis or Michael W. Sound like yourself. Write your own music from your own country. And now we're beginning to see that, and particularly in countries like Australia now with what the movement over there in Christian music from Hillsong has just brought their music to the world.
Right.
Although it's very similar in the sound, the style of American music. But there are other countries that are producing their own music in Japan and in Africa. They're doing their own Christian music, and it's really taken hold. It's exciting.
Well, I don't know about you. I was born in the mission field. My parents were missionaries. Went back as a college student to kind of visit where I came from, and went to some of these churches where they were doing their own Christian music, things that they had written. And I tell you what, I think we as Americans have lost something in our singing to the Lord. These are people that it is obviously a bottom of the heart. It's a whole body experience to watch them sing praise to God. I've seen it in South America and Bolivia. I've seen it in Haiti. Just the zest and the zeal that people have for bringing music, singing praises to God. It's just infectious.
Yeah. It really is. And I remember I was at a giant youth rally in Mexico City, and there were some contemporary bands there playing, and they sounded like American bands. They were just kind of copying the same sound, except they were singing in Spanish. And there was this one guy who was going to go up and do a mariachi kind of a thing, and I thought, oh man, the kids are probably going to boo him off the stage. They want to hear rock music.
Yeah.
But he got up and he did his thing, and it was their traditional music, and he blew the roof off. I mean, people were ecstatic, and I thought it's connecting to their heart language, and that's why I think it's so important that these nations that enter into the music thing is a way of outreach, that they don't forget their roots, don't forget their own God-given uniqueness in creativity. And so I always tried to encourage that. We went to, I took several hundred Christian artists over to Nigeria and to Ghana for several years. And that's one of the things we kept encouraging, that, sound like yourself, do your music. And because I remember the first night we were there, they were talking about this famous Nigerian singer. She was like really popular, and she was going to come. And when they introduced her, she walked out on stage, and she was dressed in this gorgeous African outfit. And I was like, oh, this is going to be so cool. Yeah. And all of a sudden, the Sandy Patty track comes on, and she's singing. I'm going, what? What is this? And so, we had some artists here from the States that we brought over that were into the Black gospel music, and they got a hold of her and started working with her. I had Danny Bell come with me.
Danny Bell Hall.
Yeah, and Danny Bell got with her. And I mean, by the end of that week, she was up there doing her stuff. Yeah. And I mean, I was flat on the floor. It was so good, and it was so anointed, and it was their cultural heart language. which is what I was always pushing for.
Right. So what was the process of you shifting to, I know the Lord now, I've met the Lord, and I need to sing about the Lord, to I need to sing about the Lord overseas. I need to help, do the Great Commission with my music. What was that transition like?
Well, it was a gradual one. I was invited to go to Africa by World Vision, and we went over there, and this was in the mid '80s, I think, and we witnessed just total starvation of people. I held a little girl that was, dying in my arms, and the nurse
Wow.
finally said, "Let me have her." And that touched me. It had nothing to do with music. It was just, oh my word, these people are really starving to death, and to see their rib cages,
Yeah.
protruding out of their chest, and their big bellies were swollen because they were so malnourished, and their eyes were, bloodshot, and their hair was turning red, which is
Wow.
another indication of malnourishment. And to see the starvation, it just really, really uh, tugged at my heart in a deep way. And I just said to my wife, we just looked at each, we just knew,
Yeah.
we needed to be there to do something. And within 6 months, we had another invitation to go to Russia and the former Soviet Union, and this was in the '80s as well. As a matter of fact, I guess this was the early '80s that this happened.
Okay.
And so we went over to Russia, and I saw another type of pain, and it was the persecution of the church and
Yeah.
Christians. They were poor; they weren't starving to death like the Africans were, but they were so pushed around and so abused and persecuted for their faith. And that's why today I think everybody talking about we're being persecuted here in America
We
through
have no idea.
this pandemic. It's just ridiculousness. And so, but these guys were, being dragged into KGB jails and beaten up, and one of the pastors had his teeth knocked out, and they wanted help. They wanted us to help them. And so Belinda and I just knew that, between the starvation in Africa and the persecution in the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc nations, that we needed to do something, that we needed to have music with a purpose. And by that time, there were so many Christian artists going around America just playing the usual places and trying to build careers. I thought, well, it's not about building a career.
Mm.
It's not that I didn't want to sell records, but
Sure.
because that helped support what we were doing.
Right. Exactly.
But I wanted to touch the world in a bigger way, and for God to use it for our music with a purpose and music with a
Yeah.
mission. And so I started a thing called I Care Ministries, and it's international Christian artists reaching the earth. Um,
Yeah. I
and
remember that.
we had quite a number of artists that got involved, and I started inviting artists to go with me, and I'm asking artists if they could donate equipment. Amy Grant one time did a tour. It was sponsored by Yamaha, and when she got back from the tour, she had all this equipment. And I was talking about something in church, and she came up to us. She said, "I've got a load of equipment. You guys are welcome to it."
Very
And
cool.
I was getting ready to go out of town. I said, "Well," I said, "I don't know how I can get it because I'm getting ready to leave in the morning." She said, "Don't worry about that. I'll bring it over to your house." So she personally loaded up her car with all these
Wow.
keyboards and speakers and guitars and all this stuff, drove it over to my house, and she and my wife unloaded it into our garage. And then when I got back in another week, I distributed it out among my team, and we took it over to Africa.
Wow.
And so we had artists giving, money to help buy keyboards. Michael W. Smith sponsored a keyboard for one of the bands, and in Eastern Europe, and several people would give us guitars and trumpets. We had a whole thing, where we were just collecting equipment. I would do concerts, and you know how people sometimes bring canned food
Right. Yeah.
I would say bring an instrument. We had all this gear that we were just distributing. Everybody that went on a trip with me, they could bring one suitcase, and then they had to carry one of these instruments over.
Oh,
So
wow.
Ephesians talks about equipping the saints, and we
Yeah.
were we were kind of doing that literally with musical equipment. And
Yeah.
but we had seminars, and we had workshops, and as we go into these different countries, we just try to help elevate their music. And the thing is there was just tons of talent
Right.
and great artists over there, and they just needed some encouragement. And
Right.
oftentimes they would teach us more than we would teach them, and just bless
Yeah.
us more than we could ever bless them.
Every mission trip I've been on has been that way. I come back, I think there's no way that they got as much out of it as I did.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, so you said you've been to 50 countries. Do you have a favorite country?
Oh, it's kind of like my favorite country is the country I'm in while I'm
Mm,
ministering.
yeah.
I don't think there's really ever been a country that I've wanted to get out of. I've always fallen in love with the people. The people make all the difference, and
Yes.
it could be a difficult country. There could be some issues going on politically or with the religions or something that make it difficult for you to be there. But you love the people so much, you want to be with them, and you want to continue with them. And that was the hardest thing, is saying goodbye.
Yeah.
And one of the first trips we made into the Soviet Union, I remember one of the girls, when we left, she said, "Will you come back?" And I said, "Oh, of course." And she says, "Everybody says that, but no one does."
Mm,
And I said, "I promise you, I will come back until communism collapses." And we did. For 12 years, we went back every year.
wow.
And so that was the commitment that we made to these people. And I loved a lot of the different cultures and the history. You go to Guatemala; it's just so incredible with the culture down there and the
Yeah.
art and just the beauty and the way the country looks. It's a land of eternal spring, flowers
Mm,
blooming. But then you go over to Africa and you see the bush and the wild animals, and
yeah.
But again, it all comes back down to the people. And so I feel like I have a family, an international family, and we don't travel as much anymore. It's more difficult
Right.
and some health issues, but I tell you, that's a part of my life that I'll cherish forever.
Well, what would you say to some of the up and coming artists that are, trying to get their careers started about the importance of doing mission work or doing work across culturally?
Well, I would say, when I lived in Nashville, I lived out on a farm up on a hill, and there was a farmer who lived down the hill from us, and he had hundreds of acres that he would plow and prepare for the harvest. And I started picturing him one day when he was out there plowing that field. I pictured another guy coming along and plowing along with him. And eventually I pictured more and more tractors showing up this field. And there were so many, they were banging into each other.
Hmm.
And then I looked in the distance and there were empty fields. No one
Mm,
was plowing them. And that little vision that I had sitting on my front porch kind of helped change my life, because I thought, I want to plow the unplowed fields. And
mhm.
if you're really serious about Jesus, and if you're really serious about sharing the gospel, go do it in a place where it's never been proclaimed.
Uh,
It's don't I think it's crazy that some of these Christian colleges have courses in how to be a Christian artist or how to get
mhm.
into the Christian industry. That's a whole different ball game
Yeah.
than getting out there and really giving yourself away, give your life away. Don't yeah, it's fun to sell records and it's fun to hear your song on the radio, but to stand in front of a tribe in Africa or India or somewhere in the world where they've never heard the gospel, and to be able to proclaim Christ and to see people give their lives to him, that is
Yeah.
unbelievable. And the reward for that is so much greater than, I always tell people, all of this stuff that we did, we never became rich, but we became wealthy.
Yeah.
We became wealthy in the harvest for the kingdom. And that's what I would say is so much more important. Go to the unplowed fields,
Mm.
and I think you will discover an adventure that you never dreamed.
I love that analogy of the fact that we're bumping into each other over here, and that there's places that are completely open and hungry for people to come and share.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, you mentioned that you're not as active in traveling overseas. I know missions is still a passion for you, but what other things are you passionate about?
Well, I think God takes us through stages in life. There are seasons, and the international travel was definitely a season, a very cherished season for our family. But now that I'm a grandfather and we're grandparents,
Yep.
God has kind of given us a whole new vision, that there are these little grandkids running around who also need to know about Jesus.
Yeah.
And we have in America 30 million Christian grandparents.
Wow.
And we could change the course of America as grandparents if we had but a vision to be someone that would want to strategically minister to our grandkids, not just bring them over and give them treats and play funny games with them,
Right.
but
Right.
really to have an actual agenda that we can, and not supplanting the parents, but with my daughter and her husband, he's not a believer, so he has no way to train up a child in the way he should go,
Right.
other than just maybe some good morals and things, but not to really teach them the great truths of the Bible. And Jessica tries her hardest, and I don't fault her at all, but we want to come alongside of her. And I think she looks to us also to take the lead. And so we're doing our best. We're learning. We make mistakes, but we're trying to really come alongside her and to train our grandkids in the knowledge and the wisdom of the Lord. And there are strategic things that grandparents can do. In this intentional grandparenting is what the Legacy Coalition, whom I'm involved with, what we do. And
Okay.
we have all kinds of classes and seminars and resources, and anybody can go to the website at legacycoalition.com.
Okay.
So simple. And we were gearing up for a huge summit in Birmingham this September, but it just got canceled.
Yeah.
Because of the whole COVID thing. But we're trying to do some online training, and just like, how do you grandparent long distance? I mean, a lot of grandparents, their kids live 2,000 miles away. How do you do that? How do you deal with teens? I mean, they have a whole different, like, I've got a teenage granddaughter, and my whole communication, I can communicate better with her online than I can face to face.
Yeah.
Her whole world is online, and so we talk back and forth. And of course, the younger one, we can play games, Bible games, and there's all kinds of neat ways of investing into their lives spiritually, and then praying for them. Praying for that they'll have a heart to respond in faith to Christ and surrender in obedience. We pray, there are all kinds of corporate prayer examples, pray over them, to bless them. I mean, how many people have ever thought of laying your hands on your grandchildren and praying a prayer of blessing over them for good health and for a sound mind and healthy emotions, especially over my teenager. I got to pray that, and then to pray for our children who are directly with them all the time, 24/7, it seems. But there's a great challenge out there for grandparents to get more engaged.
Yeah.
And so I become one of the speakers for the Legacy Coalition, and no dates because no place to talk now. Everything's closed, but
sure, but it'll open up hopefully.
It'll open up, and I'm real excited. It's kind of like this new mission field that God has set. And, he's told us several times in the Bible that we're to leave a legacy of faith for our children's children and their children. It's almost a threefold, some places a fivefold command that we would leave a legacy for those who've yet to come. And we may never even see them, but yet the seed that we plant in our own grandchildren will be continued on as they become godly men and women. So that's a whole new mission field for us, and we're excited about it.
So is some of your music being written around this theme as well?
Yeah, actually, we've done 2 albums, and it's their collection albums with different artists. The first album had guys like Wayne Watson on it, and Bruce Carroll, and Bob Bennett, and Steve Chapman of Steve and Annie Chapman.
Oh, sure, yeah.
This new album we've just finished, Steve Green is on it, Michael Card, Leon Patillo, Bruce Carroll and I wrote a song for it. Bob Bennett's on it. Dallas Home wrote a song, really funny little song. And these are albums that, and you can find them at legacycoalition.com. And they're just, all of us have become grandparents.
Yeah.
And so we all have this heart for our grandkids that they might know Christ and make Christ known. And so that's been real exciting. And writing new songs for that has definitely been just a passion for me.
So how many grandkids do you have?
Right now, 2.
Okay.
I'm working on getting my second daughter married.
Uh-huh.
And she is practically engaged to a really sweet Christian young man over in Australia. But she can't get over there because they've closed it. And so
right.
All of the plans are just on hold right now. And so the babies will have to wait. But we're hoping for at least 2 more, I would pray. But I know some grandparents who have 12, 13 grandkids.
Yeah.
And then some of my older friends, they've got great grandchildren. And to be able to be connected to them. So I think if we think about leaving a legacy, and whether you're a grandparent or not, if you're just a parent, or if you're single, or if you're involved in Christian music, or whatever your ministry is, think long term. What legacy can I leave that will bring glory to the Father?
That's important. I'm involved in my church with a couple of single parent kids and realizing that they need a different kind of a touch than even my kids did. And how can I be involved with them and show the love of Christ in a way that I can't speak their language half the time. So a lot of times it's just being present, just being available to talk and to invest in them. Yeah. Very, very important, that legacy piece. I appreciate that reminder.
Well, I know with my grandkids is sometimes, like all kids, they don't want to listen to mom and dad.
Did we?
but I didn't, for sure. Yeah. But they listen to Grammy and Grandpa.
Yeah.
And they adore them. And I've got a different relationship with particularly my teenage granddaughter. It's just a really sweet relationship. And she's going through some tough times right now. I think she listens mostly to her friends. But probably after her friends, she listens to my wife and I. And we can kind of try to bring her back center and help her not to step over the line and really mess up. And it's tough. I just look at her life and what kids are going through in high school and the bullying and all that stuff that she faces. And to walk with her, so she knows that we're there. And that's the important thing, like for you, that they know you're there.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
Amen. Yeah.
Well, what else is on your heart these days? Is there anything that you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think I would say this. There's a lot of speculation these days of what in the world is going on. We are definitely living in troubled times. Mm-hmm. And I believe we've been in the end times since Paul walked the earth. But I would just share with people, it's so easy to get on this bandwagon or that bandwagon. And a lot of people are upset about different things that are going on.
Right.
But to really realize that God is sovereign.
Amen.
And that he will come when he's ready to come. And we need to be people of peace and people who are speaking forth the truth.
Yes.
I have a tendency to watch the news too much. My wife says, Scott, you're just messing your mind up, because I'll get really upset.
Yeah.
I read about this riot or what this politician said or what was done here in this bill. And it really frustrates me. And I have to keep reminding myself that God is in control. Mm-hmm. And that I can rest. Doesn't mean that I'm not engaged. And I pull out. I'm still engaged. And I do my part as a citizen of both the United States and a citizen of the kingdom.
Yes.
But to know that God is in control and to just project that or to proclaim that to other people who are really suffering right now. They say suicide right now is at an all-time high.
Yes.
And
I've read that.
And it just, we need to be people who proclaim the hope. I started a memes page on Facebook because I realized I was starting to post all these different political things and state my opinion, and I lost some friends, and people got mad at me. And my wife said, "Why are you doing that? Why don't you just speak good things?"
Mm.
And so I said, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start a special page, Scott Wesley Brown memes." I didn't know what to call it.
Yeah.
And I've just gone back through redemptive history, and particularly, the last couple of thousand years, to great theologians that have made great statements of faith. And one of the things I love to do is preach. I almost love to preach more than I love to sing. But I don't have that opportunity because our church is closed, and other opportunities I have are off the table right now.
Right.
So in a way, it's a good way to preach. And I'm posting all these wonderful memes, these great statements of faith, from Augustine to, George Whitefield to Jonathan Edwards to R.C. Sproul to John MacArthur, Billy Graham. I mean, there's just so many great statements. And it doesn't mean you have to agree with every particular point of any of these guys' theologies, but they all said some wonderful things that really capture your heart and turn you Godward.
Yeah.
And so I think the whole thing is we all need to be Godward. We just look for things that just move us closer to the Lord and help us to focus more on Him and His truth and His goodness and His sovereignty, that He is in control. Amen. And I like that old song says He's got the whole world in His hands. Yep. I've always believed that. And no matter how bad it gets, and I wrote a song a long time ago called He Will Carry You. Yes. And in the midst of all of these problems that we face in life, we can know that He will carry us. He will carry us through.
Well, one of the things that we do as part of the Christian Music Archive is we send out a weekly prayer newsletter. How can we be praying for you, Scott?
Well, I would ask people, please pray for my health. I'm a diabetic, and I had a heart attack about 8 years ago, and I'm not always good. I see that piece of cheesecake, and I say, okay, but I have started walking almost a mile every day, which is great. But I want my health to be sustained as long as possible, and so that I might be there for my family and for people that God would give me an opportunity to minister to.
Yeah.
And for inspiration to write songs that will really minister to people's hearts. I don't want to just sit around and write little ditties. And a lot of times, as a songwriter, and we were talking about that earlier, it's you can sit down and find something really cute and clever and just try to write a song, and then it's really not from the heart. And so I want to write heart songs. I want to leave a legacy, not only through my music, but I want to leave one through my life as well.
Thanks for sharing, Scott. I appreciate the reminder that our legacy should not be focused on just our career or a specific cause. While those are good, our biggest legacy is actually going to be with our family, our children, our grandchildren. And I'd like to encourage us all to realize that our legacy is being written right now. Now, my kids haven't blessed me with grandchildren yet, but that doesn't mean I have to wait to pour into the lives of my family. I can build that legacy, hopefully a legacy built on a relationship with Jesus Christ, and I can start building that today. I'd like to thank Scott Wesley Brown for spending time with me today. And I'd like to thank you too, because if it wasn't for you, the listener, these podcasts would just be a recording of my conversations with friends, and quite frankly, that would be a bit creepy if you think about it. If you like this podcast, I invite you to send me an email or a direct message on one of our social media sites. You can reach me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter by searching for @CCMExchange. Or you can drop me an email on the website, christianmusicarchive.com/podcast. This podcast is made possible through the generous support of listeners like you. Head on over to patreon.com/ccmexchange to learn how you can help write the interview questions for the show, hear the podcast a week early, and even get a shout out in one of our episodes. Thanks for spending your time with Scott Wesley Brown and me today. Be sure to check back next week when I've got another great conversation lined up. And until next Wednesday, remember, God loves you. In fact, He's crazy about you.